He will. Welcome and good evening. Nyama, Wurundjeri Woiwurrung Gulyin, Guinganinu Bik Wenuap Darabandari, Nyariana Nyanga Bik Ban Ba Nyagu, Gagukal Nangit Bambuth Yellingbu Ba Gamaji. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people on whose land Darebin Council stand. I recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Thank you all for coming tonight for our Planning Committee meeting. Membership of this meeting is as listed in the agenda, noting that we have apologies from Councillor Williams. That brings us to item 3, disclosures of conflict of interest. I have a conflict in relation to item 7.1. 5.1, apologies, I've got some wrong notes. Thank you, Councillor Amir. I have a conflict in relation to 5.1 in that it is a conflicting duty. So we'll move to item 4 on the agenda, confirmation of the minutes of the previous Planning Committee meeting. That's moved by Councillor McCarthy, thank you, and seconded by Councillor Le Cerf. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That now brings us to consideration of reports. I now move to item 5.1. I would like to declare a conflict of interest, which is that I have a conflict relating to a conflicting duty in terms of my professional role outside of council. At its meeting on the 26th of November 2018, council resolved to establish the position of deputy mayor to act as the mayor when the mayor is absent, incapable of acting or refusing to act. As I have a conflict, I will now invite the Deputy Mayor to take the chair.
Okay, so we're at 5.1, the application for a planning permit for 635 High Street, Preston. So can we hear from the officers, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Newton. This application seeks approval to use the first floor of the Preston Hotel as a residential hotel. This means the upstairs area of the hotel can only be used for tourist accommodation and not permanent residence or short-term crisis accommodation, as referred to in some of the objections. These other forms of accommodation are separately defined in the planning scheme and would require a separate approval prior to occurring. So I just wanted to outline that. The application itself proposes to put back probably the original use back to the hotel by converting existing storerooms into residential accommodation across 8 rooms. So that means there'll be between 2 and 6 beds in each of these rooms. As set out in the officer's report, there have been 2 periods of advertising, with the second period of notice really being done to clarify that the proposal is for a residential hotel, not a rooming house. Since the report has been published, there have been further submissions which have been circulated as an addendum, and there's been additional objections received today. So we now have a total of 27 objections. The objections are summarised and responded to on pages 7 through to 9 of the officer's report. Having considered these objections and the merits of the application, the recommendation is to support the application and for council to issue a notice of decision. One of the things I will outline, there are a number of, in the recommendations, there are some important conditions to highlight. And these are really in there, understanding the proximity of this hotel to nearby residential properties. So I draw the committee's and Deputy Mayor's attention to condition 8, which is really seeking to provide a management plan and some control measures to ensure the amenity of nearby residential properties are protected and preserved. This condition is detailed on pages 4 and 5 of the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have the applicant here to speak? Yes, please just come forward to that chair. Thank you. Yes, and you have 5 minutes to speak. Oh, sorry, and can you state your name, please? Thanks. Yeah.
Hello. Okay. My name is Ben Nile. I'm the director and owner of the leasehold, of the business, not the property itself. I just want to thank everybody for meeting us, and also for the planning department for doing so much work on the application. I just want to make a few points. First is that we took over the business about 18 months ago from Woolworths. When we took it over, it was basically a gaming room. It had no kitchen, no bar, no sports bar, almost no other amenity except probably a suck on the community, to be brutally honest. Since then, they also use corporate suppliers from all around Victoria rather than from the local area. So what we've done since then is we've reopened the kitchen, we've opened a sports bar. We're trying to diversify the business, obviously, beyond where it was, which no one in this room probably would support. In doing so, we've also employed more local people. We're now using local supplies for meat, vegetables, chicken. We're trying to support local community groups. So this application is part of that. And obviously, I met some of the residents tonight, who I'm more than happy to continue to talk to, who can call me any time to talk about amenity. I take the issue of amenity very, very seriously. And we have cameras outside. We have a security guard between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. every night for 7 days a week, who are available for anybody to come and register. Complain if they have an issue, they can talk to us. We'll look it up on the cameras and we'll try and sort it out. And if we have particular patrons who are repeat offenders, obviously we can have them banned. So there's lots of ways of making sure our residents are being heard. It sounds like there's a lot of frustration over a period of time that's built up. And there's also seems to be a misunderstanding about what we're building. We don't want a rooming house at all. They are catastrophic to bring to an area, and it's the last thing you want to combine with a gaming venue, for goodness sake. I've actually hired a manager who speaks 5 languages. He'll be living on site, so he's there actually literally through the night every night, so he can actually respond to any issues around the amenity. And I noticed the management plan and some of the conditions obviously specifically make sure that we have to be short stay accommodation, that we have to have an ability to respond to local residents' complaints promptly and responsibly. And I'd just like to also, I'm not sure if you're provided with this, but we've got support from about 80 local residents, and we've also got support from a couple of community groups. And I just re-emphasise again that I'm genuinely very responsible and quite experienced, and I'm happy. I've met some of the local residents tonight, and I can feel their frustration, and I'm happy to continue to talk to them about what we can do as we go forward to get this thing open. Maybe we can expand some of the cameras outside and get better communication between those guys and some of the key contacts that can respond to their issues. We share a lot of issues with the car park and how it's being used by DHS and how they're coming in and out and the like. So there are issues that we can probably solve jointly, which are ongoing issues for all of us. So I'm open to them. I don't think I'll change their mind, but I'm certainly hoping that we can get some support, because I do want to expand the business away from what I bought and diversify the income streams, and hopefully employ a few more people and provide a bit more infrastructure for the area, which I think really needs it as it's emerging. We're going to have a courtesy bus, by the way, for people to go into sort of the Brunswick, Fitzroy type of area, so they can explore and this, what I call the northern part of Melbourne, which is the heart of Melbourne, the rooftop bars, the bands, all that sort of stuff. It's sort of the angle that we're coming from in terms of providing something a bit different. And I thank you very much for listening to my proposal tonight.
Thank you. Do we have objectors for this item who wish to speak? Yes. So we've got 2 altogether. Yep, so 3. Okay. So what we'll do is we have 5 minutes for all 3, but what I'll do is we'll give you 2 minutes each.
I'll be quick.
Okay, sure. So please state your name and then go ahead.
My name is Ian Stewart McDonald, and I'm a local resident. The application states that it wants to be that they want to turn the hotel into a backpackers, but the nearest backpackers, as far as I can see, is in Johnston Street, Collingwood. You know, in the heart of the entertainment district. Any other backpackers would be in the CBD or in North Melbourne, and I just can't see how you could attract backpackers to what's essentially quite a quiet part of Preston High Street, where there aren't really many bars and clubs nearby. It's mostly motor dealerships in a residential area. So I'm concerned that the hotel would become a de facto rooming house. I know that the applicant states that wouldn't happen, but you just have to ask yourself what sort of residents would want to stay in that side of Preston High Street. And if it does become a rooming house, then would you want those people to be exposed to a pokies room that opens until 7 a.m? I mean, I don't see what tourists would want to live above a pokies room anyway. And I'm someone who's experienced harm from poker machines. I know the problems they cause. I know that I've had problems with drugs and alcohol in the past, and taking drugs and alcohol and mixing them with poker machines is just really bad news. And I think some of the residents here state that there are a lot of heavy drinkers who use the hotel as well. There have been problems around the residential streets, and I think with this application, those problems will only increase. Thank you.
Thank you. And can you confirm your name for the minutes, please?
Ian Stewart McDonald, known as Stewart.
Great. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you.
Yep, can we get the next person? And please state your name, and you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Simon Sarowski.
Thank you.
I've got a short thing I prepared. So the Preston Hotel is open 20 hours a day, provides gaming and serves alcohol for all of that time, as you're probably already aware. The proposed development was going to add what was originally described as a rooming house, but now being referred to as a hostel. This hotel abuts a residential area that has many young families, and the appropriateness of a venue such as this in its current form is already in question. I know that's not what we're talking about here, but and as a resident of Spencer Street, I live about 100 metres down the road from the hotel. I've personally been victim to multiple instances of crime over the last few years, including theft from my property, breaking and entering, vandalism, my car window has been smashed, drunk people were pushing a car that wouldn't start from the Preston Hotel down the street and into the back of my car. I know this because I've got it on my security cameras. This was at 6 a.m. in the morning. That evening, my car was written off by a drunk driver just around the corner, in front of my house also. Now, I'm not saying all of this was people at the Preston Hotel, but many of these perpetrators only in this area do the Preston Hotel, and a lot of these crimes here are just opportunistic. Further, I often hear and see groups of men leaving the hotel in early hours of the morning. I see drunk people. When I look out the window, they're yelling, abuse, profanity. They're just hanging around in front of people's houses. Now, the description, as Stuart, I guess, of this development as a hostel, I think, is questionable. I totally agree with what he says. There's no tourists or backpackers want to stay kilometres from where all the attractions are in Melbourne, especially above a pokie venue. Now, whether it's a hostel or rooming house, look, I understand there are disadvantaged members
10
of
seconds.
the community who need cheap housing. I'll skip forwards. I think putting accommodation above a gambling venue is in contradiction of your electronic gaming machine policy.
Thank you.
Cut it there.
Thanks. And can we get the last person, please? And just state your name, and you've got 2 minutes. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Nick Georgiakis. I've been a resident at Spencer Street in Preston for 31 years. So I live directly across from the Preston Hotel. So I've seen a lot of activity happening, and it's not pleasant. So I'm just going to state some points, then I'll just summarise without taking up too much time. In regards to the proposed accommodation, there are major safety concerns regarding the type of people that are going to be occupying accommodation, e.g. drug users, alcoholics. This causes major safety concerns for young families that live in the street. The placing of this rooming house for what I'm assuming is for high-risk individuals, not a conducive environment for better living, and has only been shown to exacerbate issues. These safety and security concerns will then have major adverse effect on property values for the entire street. The addition of this accommodation will only compound to the issues that are present, e.g. noise pollution. In regards to changes that are being proposed to the car park, we have the following concerns. Traffic congestion will worsen if there is entry and exit points on Spencer Street, which in turn will increase the likelihood of accidents occurring. Our point of view has been backed by state and federal government, which we had discussions with, and we have letters to support that. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is that if you don't live in the area, you will not experience what we experience on a day-to-day basis. There's a lot of abuse, there's a lot of swearing going on. I've had my car hit several times with the car park, which is meant to be only an entry point, but it's used as an exit point. So therefore, it is becoming a major, major concern for all residents. And I'm not talking about only myself, but just the residents in general. We want to differentiate between commercial and residential.
10 seconds.
Yeah, so basically we're totally against the proposal of it. These are our reasons. Without further ado, I want you to do what's right and what we leave on the table today to be seriously considered.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillors, do we have questions about this application? No questions? Okay, is there a motion? Councillor Greco.
Excuse me, Chair. Look, I have some questions, if I may.
You may. Is that?
The first question
Go
I'd
ahead.
like to ask is that, through you, is it was mentioned about there not being other backpacking places in the vicinity. Can we just get some confirmation about that, where there are backpacking venues?
Yes, thank you.
Deputy Mayor, I'm probably unable to answer where there are any in Darebin. There's certainly hotels and the like, and what the proposal is here is a residential hotel. But off the top, I cannot describe where the locations are of backpacker hostels.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Greco, did you have another question?
Yeah, I do. The other question that I would have is just in relation to, it was mentioned about some antisocial activity in the area, and I just wanted to get some sort of understanding from our officers if they are aware of any particular incidences that have been reported in and around that site.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor, all we can say is that there was very strong feeling came through in the objections that were received, that clearly there are some genuine concerns there for residents. As far as specific incidents, it's probably not something my team is specifically across, only the awareness through the objections. But as you know, we've got another team within council that has a clear focus on safety and community safety issues.
Thank you.
And just one final question, if I may.
Go ahead, Councillor Greco.
This is an application for a backpacking venue. Just to get from our officers, in terms of the application that we have received, what assurances that application and the specifications given to us will ensure that it remains a backpacking facility and not turn into a boarding room facility.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Newton, this is a question of compliance. So if there are concerns about permanent residents being there, there would be a compliance issue with the planning permit. There's also some requirements which I mentioned earlier in Condition 8, which are really focused to respond to what are genuine concerns from the residents, to try and peg back and provide a higher standard of amenity, particularly in respect to this specific use. It may not cover as far as existing concerns with a hotel, but it certainly can deal with anything attached to the proposed use.
Thank you. Councillor Surf.
I just wanted to follow on Councillor Greco's first question. His question was specifically around backpackers in Darebin. Through you to the officers, are there any other residential hotels, which is the use, that's been requested here across Darebin? And if so, where are they?
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Newton, this is stretching my memory and of spatial recognition of the city of Darebin, but we certainly have the likes of Bell City Hotel. There are a number of motel venues, but those attached with licensed venues. There are a limited number of these in the municipality. There's probably 3 that I can think of off the top of my head, but there may be more.
Okay, thank you. Councillor
Sorry,
Surf.
just a follow-up from that. Are any of them located within a facility that has poker machines?
Thank you.
The only one I'm aware of that has gaming machines is the Grandview Hotel, and I'm unsure of whether they're still actively using the residential component of that. Certainly, to my knowledge, they are.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Lawrence.
Councillor Newton, I'd like to just ask through you to the officers two questions. One regards to a reference was made to our existing gaming policy, and that asserting that this accommodation would be in conflict with our gaming policy. So my question to the planning officers is, does that policy conflict, if it exists, how would that come into big consideration on planning grounds?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lawrence.
The officers' report actually deals with this question about the relevance of that particular policy. So I would largely point to state rules limit the reach to which a policy that sits outside the planning scheme can regulate a proposed use. So we've provided some response. It doesn't remove the point that, and it's very strong on what council's general position is through that policy, but what it points out is that this is an existing use that is there already, and the planning rules don't stretch as far as limiting a future activity on that premises or nearby because of the existence of gaming machines.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, did you have a further question?
Yes, Councillor Newton. The other question I had was, I just lost my thought here. In relation to this application, through to a question to the planning officers, if it was considered a rooming house, what changes or additions would be required to this current application?
Thank you.
I'll draw Deputy Mayor Newton's attention to the first condition in this in the recommendation, and it actually requires the removal. The plans do refer to rooming house. There's been amendments to the permit in written form that have come through which triggered the re-advertising that I referred to earlier. Condition 1 asks for any reference to rooming house to be removed and to be replaced with proper, or what will be the permitted use, just to avoid any ambiguity or confusion.
Thank you. Are there any further questions?
Could I just
Councillor
have a
Lawrence.
supplementary question on that, because
Yes.
it's an unusual application. It's not a normal one that I've come across before. I suppose what I'm trying to ask is, if we were to consider this as a rooming house, what would be the additional changes that would be requested, or would it not be allowed because of the structure?
Thank you.
That assessment, hasn't been undertaken, but it's if you have a look at the floor plans, which are up on the screen now, There's not a whole host of modifications that I'm aware of that would be required for that conversion. The main distinction, because we're dealing with a land use application, is the length of stay. So a rooming house is for permanent residents or for a longer term than what a residential hotel would require.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
I've got a motion, unless there's any further questions.
Can I check for any further questions before a motion's put? Yes, go ahead, Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you. Do I need to stand?
No, you're fine. Take your seat. Yep, but please go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. The motion is actually not the officer's recommendation, but is a motion to refuse. I'll read it out, and
Yes,
hopefully
please.
officers have it to appear on screen for the benefit of councillors. So the motion is, point 1, the proposed use is not in keeping with the objectives of clause 37.06, Priority Development Zone Schedule 2, which in part seeks to provide opportunities for sustainable travel and increased use of public transport. The site is not particularly well located, proximate to public transport, which is considered to be the primary method of transport for the intended guests. 2, the proposed use of the site for the purpose of a residential hotel, in brackets, backpackers hostel, close brackets, providing temporary accommodation is not considered appropriate in relation to neighbouring residential zones, as it is considered the amenity of residential properties abutting and adjacent to the land will be detrimentally impacted by the proposed use. 3, the proposed residential use is not in keeping with strategies and goals as delineated for Precinct H, Preston Auto Alley, of the Preston Central Structure Plan 2006 as amended, which seeks to promote use which supports increased employment opportunities and office-based business. 4, it is considered the proposal is contrary to Council's electronic gaming machine policy. The proposed accommodation is above a venue with electronic gaming machines, EGMs, and new guests would be located proximate to the machines. It is considered that the proposal would increase harm caused by EGMs in Darebin.
Thank you, Councillor
I
McCarthy.
should have said as well that the motion is that the planning application be refused based on those grounds.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Messina. Councillor McCarthy, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Look, we do have a history in this chamber of considering applications of this nature and their, in my view, their conflict with our stated objective under our EGM policy as outlined in the motion that you have before you, councillors. But it's not just the location of the proposed accommodation directly above electronic gaming machines, which we know cause an inordinate amount of harm to residents and temporary visitors to this city. It's also that this proposal is not consistent with our own economic development strategies for this area, nor is it consistent with the proposed precinct structural plan and planning policies that we have in place in this area. So from a strategic purpose, I don't believe that this proposal meets the test. It is an unusual proposal, and the proposal, whilst on paper can be described as a backpackers hostel, that's a very difficult thing to regulate when the likelihood, and we just need to look at the nature of accommodation that we do have in this city, which is above similar sorts of facilities and similar to other parts of Melbourne, where people who are highly vulnerable are exposed to gambling harm through the co-location of that accommodation. The objectors made some interesting points about how realistic is this that this would actually operate as a backpackers hostel given the proximity, and the motion as listed goes some distance to making that point as well. Likewise, the issues around whilst there is some public transport in the area, this is not a public transport hub. So it is less likely that backpackers are going to find themselves making their way naturally. So I have serious doubts about this proposal, not only about the viability of the proposal, but actually about the reality of the proposal in terms of providing backpacker accommodation as is proposed. And I think it's far more likely that this will turn out to be either a rooming house proposal or some variation. Councillors, this is a question that we can tackle on both planning grounds, but we can also tackle on moral grounds. But I think, as you've heard from objectors already this evening, there are some specific issues that have not been addressed. I think they were acknowledged, and I thank the applicant for acknowledging that there are concerns for residents, and I'd urge the applicant and residents to work together to try to resolve those issues. I certainly can't support this proposal given what I've heard, and I'd hope that as a neighbourhood some of those antisocial behaviours that have been identified can be resolved. But that's not something we can deal with in this chamber. We need to deal with the application before us, and on that basis, councillors, I'd urge you to not support the officer's recommendation.
10 seconds.
And instead support the alternative.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Messina. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. I can only add to that. What we have in front of us is a hostel, a backpackers accommodation that provides cheap accommodation for a traveller. It's a particular market segmentation. And what we have in front of us is a Preston Hotel seeking some accommodation for that particular area. And I'm concerned about the primary risk to the residents associated with short-term and room-based accommodations to transient travellers, the impacts to occupant safety. I'm concerned about overcrowding of that particular area, and what are the control measures to control the occupancy numbers, which can be problematic, and the negative impact to the residents in the area, which in turn affects the livability in the area. Backpackers need connectivity to public transport, and unfortunately it lacks that. Over my term as a councillor, I've had numerous complaints about the disturbance of patrons to the residents, and also about the non-compliance of the proprietor. The bollard closure of the exit to the Cambrian Avenue causes many issues to the residents in Spencer Street. The prior planning application clearly stated that the traffic flow must have Spencer Street as an entrance and Cambrian as an exit. This has not been adhered to. The commercial vehicles and the patrons' vehicles cause congestion to the road at all hours of the day due to this closure impacts on the residents. My concerns are if the Preston Hotel lack the compliance with the bollard removal due to a planning permit, then how will they comply with overcrowding in the building? Is it really a backpackers accommodation or a sleep out for addicted gamblers?
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there further speakers to the motion? Councillor Amir.
This has been a proposal for which there's been really strong community interest. I've had residents contacting me about this proposal for a number of months now, mostly in opposition, but also noting that we did receive 2 statements of support from sports clubs and the petition that was mentioned earlier on. I wanted to note the valuable community role that hotels can play, and acknowledging some of the points raised by the applicant and in some of the submissions around the creation of jobs, community donations, and providing access to space for community groups, and also the applicant's ongoing work to address community concerns, supporting local businesses, and a commitment to ongoing improvements. What really hit me the hardest, though, were those stories that I received. Some people were from the nearby area, and others had heard about the applications and wanted to tell us as councillors their story about how they'd been impacted by pokies addiction, and they're the stories that have stuck with me and are on my mind in hearing what we have today. And I do agree, it is a quieter part of Preston, but it is an area where density will be increasing. I think having a local pub can be a good thing, and it's great to hear that there's the food available now, and for people to have somewhere to go to have a meal and spend time with friends, and noting that the pub has been operational since 1924. So I acknowledge that the current owner isn't responsible for all of the challenges to the local residents since 1924. So I can certainly see both sides in this circumstance, but in this case, I'll be prioritising community safety and demonstrating we take our EGM policy seriously. And at a future date when there aren't EGMs at the venue, then that might be a time to return to the question of residential hotel then.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers to the motion? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Councillor Newton, I'd speak against this, the points that have been put up for a refusal, because I'm concerned that we're not going into VCAT with valid planning points to break it. to stop this application. I've got some concerns about this application because it's unfamiliar to me, and this issue, if it's a rooming house, then I would like an assessment here on what is a safe rooming house. There are elements which I can see could be safe. There's other elements I see which I don't know about. So, and we heard from the officers that that assessment of it becoming a rooming house hasn't been done. So that concerns me because is it a hostel or is it a rooming house? Now, I can't support these points of refusal because they're not valid. And we've already heard that our gaming policy won't be valid inside VCAT. We've also heard that, in fact, there hasn't been an assessment if it turns into a rooming house. So the fear or stigma of the two words rooming house isn't grounds for us to cite issues of community safety because a rooming house will be governed by the planning application and criteria that's been set down at the state at that level. I think point 2 is probably the only point we now have that is a valid planning permit.
10 seconds.
But to go in and give false hope with this motion where we haven't got technical planning grounds, I think is going to frustrate the residents and waste the council's resources.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Through you, Deputy Chair, just wondering if I could ask a question through you to the officers, just on an issue that's been raised by Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, you may.
The question is, in relation to these 4 grounds of refusal, can we get some indication from the officers whether they will be defendable in VCAT within the jurisdiction of VCAT?
Thank you, Councillor Greco.
It's a difficult question to really answer because through the officers, we've provided our recommendation, our assessment of the application. This is a position that council, through the planning committee, are free to put forward. And I wouldn't feel it would be appropriate to sit here and critique, a decision by, in essence, the council. But I think we've provided an assessment of what the merits of the application are, and I would hate to be in a position where I'm participating in the debate through you, Deputy Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Greco, would you like to speak to the motion? No. Are there any further speakers? No? Okay, so Councillor McCarthy, would you like a right of reply?
I would, though. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you to all the speakers, both for and against. I would like to just respond to the point raised by Councillor Lawrence, the suggestion that these aren't technical planning grounds. They are planning grounds. They're not the planning grounds that Councillor Lawrence may wish to put forward, but Councillor Lawrence has had the opportunity to put forward amendments to this resolution and he's chosen not to. And if there were things that should have been said that Councillor Lawrence felt should have been said in this resolution, then it's incumbent upon him to raise those as amendments rather than to leave us hanging wondering what they actually are. I think these are robust grounds. I would expect that this responds not only to the issues raised by residents here tonight, but probably more importantly and significantly in the context of a VCAT case, actually make reference to specific council plans and documents, including council's planning policies, and of course significantly put into practice the very specific policy direction that our EGM policy puts in place. It is very easy to sit in this chamber and to say that you don't think that these things will be seriously considered. And we've all done that as councillors to put up rebuttals, but it is incumbent upon councillors, if they wish to make an argument against an application, to be constructive and creative in that process, and that opportunity has been provided.
Point of order, Chair.
What's your point of order, Councillor Lawrence?
There's a number of assertions that have been made here, so I'd certainly foreshadow an alternative motion if this fails.
Can I get some advice on that?
So already the assertion, I don't have an alternative, is wrong.
So we'll deal with this motion first. So, Councillor McCarthy, would you like to continue your right of reply?
Oh, thank you. Look, it's always interesting to be interrupted during a right of reply, but the fact of the matter is we have a resolution in front of us. It relates to specific planning grounds. Councillors have the choice to oppose this application on those grounds and send a very clear message that we do not believe that accommodation provided above electronic gaming machine spaces is appropriate. That's the key issue here. At the end of the day, we need to make a decision this evening, and I hope that councillors will oppose this application in its current form.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. So, councillors, we do have a motion in front of us that we'll be voting on. So, all in favour, please raise your hand. And all against. And are there any abstainers? Abstain? Okay, so we've got one abstaining from Councillor Lawrence, so that motion is passed. And can we please get Councillor Rennie back into the room? Thanks.
Sorry, just through you, Chair, you'll need to read out the planning committee decision and let them know about the process from here.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cerf. So the planning committee has decided to not approve the development plan for this item. So what else do I have to say? Okay. Yep, so the motion that has been approved is the alternate motion that is on the screen. Thanks.
Sorry, can I just suggest Mr Rudd provide some further advice to the objectors and the applicant?
Yep.
Yeah,
Thank
through
you.
Deputy Mayor Newton. So what now? The decision has now been made. The applicant now has 60 days in which to lodge an appeal at VCAT. If that occurs, any objectors will be notified and given the opportunity to participate in those proceedings.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks.
I've just lost the screen.
So we'll move now to item 5.2 on the agenda, the application for a planning permit for 295 to 297 Gilbert Road, Preston. Over to the officers.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. This application seeks approval for an apartment, a three-storey mixed-use development, including 6 dwellings and retaining the ground floor shop. Just a reminder, the application was deferred on the 20th of June and further, a decision was unable to be reached at the Planning Committee meeting of the 15th of July 2019. Since the 15th of July meeting, there have been further changes made to the plan to respond to some of the discussions that occurred at the committee meeting on that evening and some issues that were raised in objections. These primarily relate to the layout of the ground floor and in particular the retreats and study areas. The modified plans now show these retreat areas as more open and readily accessed spaces with a Euro-style laundry, which means that it's sitting behind cabinetry or cupboards, but it has to be accessed through those spaces. So most of the rest of the development is unchanged from what you would have seen previously. It remains 6 dwellings, including 1 bedroom, 1 unit with a 1 bedroom and a study, plus 1 with 2 bedrooms, and then there's 4 that have got 2 bedrooms with a study. Now these are all made so it's a little bit more difficult for them to be reconfigured as bedrooms. Just a reminder too, the 2 rear dwellings do transition down to a lower scale, consistent with the residential character at the rear. Car parking is in the form of 5 single car garages, and then there's an access or parking space provided adjacent to the shop via Gilbert Road. There was a question about drainage that came up at the last meeting, and just to make clear, the drainage is via the right of way to the rear to a side street. There were 6 objections that were received previously. They are also summarised and responded to within the officer's report, and the application has been assessed as having a high level of compliance and is recommended for support subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mr Rudd. I don't have any people listed to speak, either applicant or objector. Can I confirm there's no one to speak? No. Thank you, councillors. We'll move straight to any questions that you might have. Councillor Lawrence?
Mayor Rennie, I just want to move the motion.
Yes. Is that
As
the
per the recommendation, officer recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. And someone to second it? Councillor Newton. Thank you. Councillor Lawrence?
Yes, Mayor Rennie. Well, basically this application has been debated previously also about in terms of what things are and what things are labelled. That's gone to some amendment from the applicant and clarified the usage of those spaces, and so I think that that's a good outcome, and we don't have any other grounds to refuse this application.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Newton?
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I agree with what Councillor Lawrence has said, and for me, we had this application at our last planning meeting where I definitely had some concerns about the retreats and how they were being used. So I'm really pleased that the applicant has come back to us with a much clearer indication that these won't be used as bedrooms, and I think it's clear from the plans with a laundry in place next to the retreats rather than an ensuite. I think that makes a huge difference. So I really want to thank the applicant for that. So for me, I'm satisfied that this one will be a pretty good use of the site, and that 3 stories is acceptable for this area. So please to support this application with the changes. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any further speakers? No. There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. The Planning Committee has decided to approve the planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to appeal to VCAT, to lodge an appeal. The applicant has 60 days to appeal any condition of the permit. Notices detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant next week. And thank you for coming along again. We'll now move to item 5.3 on the agenda, 37 Story Road Reservoir. And I'll hand over to Mr Rudd or Mr Rollis to...
Thank you, councillors. This is an application for a medium density development site known as 37 Story Road Reservoir. 5 dwellings are proposed. Dwellings 2, 3 and 4 are 2-bedroom dwellings. Dwelling 1 fronting Story Road is a 3-bedroom dwelling. Dwelling 5 to the rear of the site is a 4-bedroom dwelling. Each dwelling is provided with the requisite car parking and private open space. The development requires 1 visitor space. That is not provided, so the applicant is seeking a reduction of 1 visitor space. The floor plates are conventional in arrangement, and by that I mean the living zones are on the lower level, the quiet zones are on the first floor. The living zones connect to private open space on the ground floor. A single driveway provides vehicular access to all the dwellings. Studies and TV rooms are noted on the first floor. These cannot be easily converted into additional bedrooms because they are transitional spaces. And by that I mean, councillors, you walk through the space to get to another space, so very difficult to convert into additional bedrooms. The dwellings have a conventional appearance in that the fenestration, the external materials and the forms of the buildings with hip roofs are conventional in nature. Dwelling 1 fronting Story Road has a good front setback of 9 metres, which will be landscaped, presents as a 2-storey home to the street. All the accessways are either, that is the pedestrian accessways are either visible from Story Road for dwelling 1 and from the internal drive for each of the other dwellings. In terms of external impacts, all habitable room windows are screened. in terms of overshadowing cast by the development, it's within the parameters of the Res Code standards. Councillors, this application was advertised by placing a notice on the site, and notices were forwarded to adjoining owners and occupiers, and as a result of that formal notification, 17 objections have been received. The objections are summarised and appear at page 42 of the agenda. Councillors, overall, the development achieves compliance with planning controls, that being enabled character and clause 55 of the Darebin Planning Scheme. On this basis, we are recommending support of the project, that a notice of decision be issued with conditions. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you very much. We have the applicant listed to speak tonight. I'll invite Mr. Zoran Zanovic to come and speak. Thank you. You have 5 minutes to address the council.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, councillors. My name is Zoran Zanovic and I'm a planning consultant. As we know, the site's in the general residential zone where the objectives seek to encourage development, respects the character of the area and also encourage diversity of housing types and housing growth. Site's located close to the Reservoir train station, bus services, High Street and all the other local community facilities and services. In terms of the local policy in the MSS, well, the site's in the neighbourhood character precinct E7. Proposal responds to the assessment guidelines in terms of height, building form, materials, design detail and front boundary treatment. In terms of clause 55, well, the proposal responds to both the qualitative and quantitative measures. Site coverage is at 40%, well below 60%, the standard of 60%. 33% of the site is permeable, greater than the 20% minimum, and 36% is set aside for garden area. In terms of the issues that are raised in relation to overdevelopment, the proposal responds to both those objectives and standards of clause 55. There's space for landscaping and canopy tree planting. And most importantly, the development ratio proposed is 1 unit per 243 square metres of land, which we believe is appropriate in an area nominated for incremental change. In terms of neighbourhood character, we say the proposal responds. It's a low-scale development. It includes material finishes, colours, fenestration, pitched roofs and window and door proportions, all characteristic in this area. There are numerous examples of medium density development along Story Road. In fact, I counted some 17 that have occurred in this streetscape. In terms of the double-storey form, there was some concern about double-storey form in the backyard. We've got some good setbacks, approximately 4.3 metres from the rear boundary, a building height at the back of 7.3 metres, and there's more than adequate space for screen planting. In addition, there's highlight windows and double glazed windows. In terms of car parking and traffic, well, we've had an independent traffic engineer prepare an assessment in terms of the waiver of the reduction in the visitor car space and also the car parking along Story Road. And the traffic engineer concluded there would be no impacts, and this was also underlined by the council's traffic engineer that had no objections. In terms of overlooking, there were some issues in relation to the objections, had some concerns about overlooking. There's 2 windows that have no screening, and that was in accordance with the officer's advice because they weren't within 9 metres of any private open space or habitable room windows. So therefore, the diagrams that show on the plan clearly stipulate that those windows would not be screened. In terms of overshadowing, well, the shadow diagrams clearly demonstrate compliance with standard B21, and there was also some concerns about noise from the proposal, and as the officer noted, that noise level would be normal to this residential zone. So in summary, we believe the proposal before the council is a well-designed medium density development, responds to the state and local planning policy framework, will not create any unreasonable amenity impacts to the adjoining properties or the public realm, and we believe that the planning officer's decision should be upheld. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sajanovic. I don't have any objectors listed on my sheet to speak, but can I confirm whether there are objectors? Thank you. Are you both speaking separately or together? You may both speak. You have 5 minutes between you, so you can come up together if you wish, or one after another, in which case I'll give you...
Hello, my name's Angela.
So I'll just check, is it your preference that I put 2.5 minutes up for each of you, or that 5 minutes and you come and sit together?
Why don't we do that?
So I'll just draw your attention to the fact that you've got a clock up there and there'll be 5 minutes, so you can use that time between you.
2.5. Yeah, I'll just be quick.
Okay.
So do I introduce myself?
Yes, thank you.
My name's Angela Reynaud and I am the neighbour of Murray, whose property backs onto the proposed property. I've heard a very clear summary today of the legalities of the property, which all sound very convincing. Were my neighbours a normal family, but Mari's son is severely disabled and he is a very vulnerable member of our community, and I believe his rights need protection. He's a severely autistic boy and he will find this property, a two-storey property built close to their back fence, highly distressing. Mari and her husband have gone to enormous trouble to keep their son out of institutional care and prepared their property in such a way as to protect him and provide him with a safe haven. This proposed property will inhibit his or impact negatively on his standard of life, and I think that's a very serious concern.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mari Dinui. I reside at 24 Northern Hay Street. My property is directly bang right in the middle of a new property that is happening. I will send some photos around. I'm really sorry, I'm not organised. I didn't put my name down. I didn't think I was going to speak, but I felt really strongly about it, and I thought, even though I'm not organised and I'm sorry if it felt I had to say something. This is my backyard from my family room. My family room is fully glazed. So what I will see, and we had to build a pie fence on our side so our son would go across to our neighbour's fence. So we've done that all the way across. Now, when we're in our family beautiful glazed room, we are going to see a double-storey building. We're not going to even be able to see the sky. And I will just show you photos. One of my neighbours, and in relation to their lovely car parking, if you go to the people on the street and you ask them about car parking, you will know that when it hits 6 o'clock and people are home, there's a massive issue. Story Road is a street where there are massively large properties. What is happening on this property as these lovely elderly people die, they're building 5, 8 units, you name it, bang. And this is a picture of how that street looks like at approximately 6 o'clock. Now, there's massive issues with waste removal and the whole lot of it. I'm actually asking, this property is located within the Oak Hill Estate. The Oak Hill Estate is an area of heritage homes. It's a few streets that are heritage homes. We need to stop the overdevelopment of Story Road, because one by one, you Google it, you'll see everyone, bang, 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 they're building units. And I will also show you a picture of a single story, and this is how it impacts on their yard. This is my neighbour. We've got a beautiful pool, and I've built a pool, and I've got a trampoline, and this is a single story. Can you imagine a double story? Single story. This is how it looks like to the people in the back. So think about it. If this was your yard, would you be happy? And we're living in Reservoir. We're not living in Clifton Hill where we're all on. This is a massive block. They can really construct it so it doesn't. And the regulation does say 5 bedrooms. It doesn't matter how small the bloody bedrooms are. I'm really sorry.
Sorry, I'll have to stop you. I do require all debate to be respectful.
They're saying they don't need the visitor
That's
car park.
time.
By regulation, they do.
Okay.
That's it, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I wanted to ask whether there's been any opportunity, or to what extent have there been discussions between the developer and the objector in relation to trying to resolve their particular issue?
Sorry, no, the question is for the officers, so there's no further opportunity for applicants or objectors to speak at this stage. I'll refer that question to Mr Wallace.
Councillors, we made contact with the owner's representative, the designer, and we raised the issue of the neighbours' concern, particularly their circumstance. The designer indicated that they have double glazed windows to habitable room windows, and windows are treated to prevent the overlooking component. They also indicated that the development is set back beyond the minimum requirement. Beyond that, the designer made very clear that they would prefer not to do anything more to their development because it's highly compliant.
Thank you. Further question,
Mayor, I'd just like to
Greco?
foreshadow that I have an alternate motion, if there aren't any
Well,
further
we're
questions.
not at a motion yet, so I'm just seeking questions at this point. Councillor Newton.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, to the officers, I'm curious about if it would help at all to have a higher fence or a particularly soundproof fence or anything like that. Thanks.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Newton. Mr Wallace.
Councillors, my view as a planner of our organisation, it is our view that the double glazing goes a long way to preventing the transference of noise.
Sorry, I must stop you. You must not interject.
But I must make very clear that in this instance, the planners are processing a development application. The use of the land for the purpose of dwellings does not require a planning permit. So we have no real control as to how the occupation occurs on the land. In terms of acoustic treatment to a fence structure, again, my view there would be that goes beyond the ambit of planning control. If there was an instance where the neighbour and the developer were of the view that they'd like a better constructed fence, they could do that completely outside the planning arena. There is a Fencing Act. There's control as to who pays for what part of the fence beyond standard. And in most instances, as far as I know, if someone wanted a fence beyond the minimum standard of, say, a 1.8 paling fence, the neighbour wanted the superior fence would end up paying for that additional component. But there's a Fencing Act and there's a dispute settlement centre set up to deal with fencing matters alone. It's quite a complex area, even though we're only referring to fences. So with regard to this application, in assessing the application based on the planning controls, I'd be advising councillors that an acoustic fence is not necessary from the point of view of a planning assessment. I completely understand that the neighbour may have a very different view, and I appreciate that, but from a planning point of view, there's no control. So if councillors saw fit to impose such a condition, there's a very likely chance that that condition could be contested, and there's a very strong chance that the applicant would win that contest.
Thank you. Are there further questions? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, through you to the officers. Just in regards to this application and the yield, I understand it's a large block. If, in terms of housing diversity, does this continual construction of double-storey add to housing diversity as per our housing policy in relation to those requiring single-storey accommodation?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Lawrence. Mr Wallace.
Councillor, my view on that would be the diversity doesn't often have to be achieved solely on the one side. It would be the area that we're referring to. So in this instance, having double-storey throughout doesn't completely go against the diversity, because that diversity could be achieved elsewhere with other developments. applicants will choose to build double-storey and single-storey homes. The applicant in this instance has chosen to build two-storey.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? No, there being none, I'll seek a motion. Councillor Greco.
Mayor, I have an alternate motion. I'd like it'll appear up on the screen. There it is. I'll read it out for the benefit of councillors. That the Planning Committee defer this application to our next Planning Committee meeting and request that planning officers facilitate a conference meeting between the applicant and the objector to enable them to resolve their outstanding issues.
Thank you for that. Is there a seconder for that motion?
Can I ask a question,
Question.
In relation to this before considering?
Sorry, I'll need to get a seconder first.
It's a question about in relation to where we are in the 60 days.
Mayor Rennie, I'm happy to second the motion.
Okay, so I'll take that as having a seconder, and I think we have a question in relation to whereabouts we are in relation to the 60 days.
We're beyond 60 days.
Beyond 60 days. Okay. Was that your question, Councillor Messina? Okay. Okay, Councillor Greco.
Thank you. Look, I think the motion is self-evident in itself in terms of deferring this application. Why I'm putting forward that particular motion is that we're dealing with pretty particular circumstances here. From what I have heard so far is that perhaps there hasn't been enough communication between the developer and the objector, and I think this gives a last opportunity before the Planning Committee makes a decision on this matter to enable both the developer and the objector to sit down, facilitated by a council planning officer, to see whether some solution or some creative proposal can be put forward to try and actually resolve some of the outstanding issues that the objector has put forward. I know that perhaps that it's quite limited in terms of the scope and in terms of the what means there will be to try and arrive at a solution, but I think that the best way to try and achieve that is to put the parties in a room to sit down, facilitated by one of our officers who have a lot of planning experience, and to see whether the two parties could arrive at an outcome, and then to come back here to council, to a planning committee meeting, and hopefully with an agreed position so that the planning committee can make a decision on that. The final point that I would make is that again, I think it gives the opportunity to the objector to put forward some creative solution, and also for the developer to reconsider what options they could put forward in terms of trying to resolve this. So I hope councillors will support this, and it gives us a bit more breathing room, and so like that we can actually then make a decision fully knowing that we've tried our best to try and also bring the parties together to try and come to a workable solution.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence.
Mayor Rennie, I would like to support this notion of some kind of better negotiation and some time for that. And in doing so, I would foreshadow a second alternative motion I'll be moving if this deferral's not possible. So that deferral motion I will be moving is that we approve the application with the added conditions of heights on the rear fences and the reduction of the mass of the fifth unit to a single-storey unit in compliance with all guest and visitor parking requirements. Now, so that is a very strong direction from council. Now, the grounds for that amendment would be the basis of garden character in the area. I've dealt with disability issues in this street, and I've gone all the way to VCAT, and we did not win even a slight addition of 500 millimetres to a fence to protect another resident who was in this area with severe disabilities, and there was overlooking of his recreational aqua area at the rear of the house. People come to Darebin because they have disabled families to treat their families in a healthy manner. Now, we have an applicant who's seeking to exploit the block as other applications have got through because they're large blocks. but that does not discount the garden character in the Northern A Street and the Oak Hill estate. And I know there's no sympathy for disabled people in the planning scheme, but we can stand up for the garden character of this property and request an amendment to a single story for the form of the 5th unit.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers to this motion? Councillor Messina.
May I ask a question to the officers through Mayor Rennie? Have we actually prior put in a notice of motion to change the amendment, and has that been successful at VCAT privately, please?
So I'm not quite
The
sure I
changing of the
understand.
double story to a single story at the back, has that occurred prior at a council, at a planning
So
committee?
has a similar
Yes,
condition
as a
been
president.
upheld at VCAT?
And how did that then eventuate into VCAT, please?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Messina. I'll refer that to the officers. So,
Point of order, Mayor Rennie.
yes, what's the point of order, Councillor Lawrence?
We're currently debating this motion, not the garden character motion, because we haven't got it in front of us. We're debating a deferral motion, but anyway.
Okay, I believe that Councillor Messina was asking that question because it might impact on the way she would vote on this matter. But, Councillor Messina, do you require an answer in order to vote on this matter?
I actually would like an answer, please.
Okay, so on the grounds that Councillor Messina requires an answer in order to vote on this matter, I'll ask the officers to comment on whether conditions reducing a floor at the rear of property have been supported in VCAT in similar circumstances.
Councillors, in most instances, if we got to a situation, assuming it wasn't coming to council for a decision, we were making a decision under delegation, and we got to a point where we were thinking of making a dwelling a single story from a 2-story, we'd turn our minds to refusing that application rather than conditioning it, because it's a different project that they have applied for to the one we're trying to change by condition. That's what we would do under delegation. Has VCAT approved a scaling down of components of the building? Yes, they have, but the circumstances, the context will most likely be different. These sites are very large sites, and therefore the applicants attempt to put more dwelling yield on them because they are large. So my view would be that we'd be suggesting that if you were to reduce the scale of a development, it'd be more a refusal than a conditional type of approval.
Thank you. So, councillors, we are debating the motion that is in front of us, and we've had the mover and the seconder. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I'd like to speak in support of the deferral motion. And this is not an easy decision, I don't think, because we are outside of the 60 days. But for me, I think that Councillor Greco has some really good points about that. This is a unique situation, and yes, it is sort of outside of some of the planning conditions or laws that we can use. But I think this is about a particular person who lives in that house, and I think that it would be worth the applicant and the objector meeting to see if there's something that can happen that would help with that. So I think that's important to our role as councillors to try to facilitate something between an issue that really deeply affects a particular family in a particular community and the need for more development for more residents. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any further speakers? No, there being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. This council meeting has determined to defer this matter and requests that planning officers facilitate a conference as per the motion. So that brings us to the end of that item. We'll now move on to item 5.4. Item 5.4 relates to the Preston Market update. This is not a regular planning matter, and so there is an opportunity here for people to make submissions. People are able to speak for up to 2 minutes, and it would be great if I could get an indication of the number of people who wish to make a submission. Just checking. So, Maria Paletti and Chris Erlinson. Fantastic. So you go first. I don't mind who goes first. Please come up. Ms. Paletti, you have 2 minutes to make a submission.
After I introduce myself?
After you introduce yourself. Okay, we won't start the clock while you introduce.
I need every second I can get. Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'm Maria Paletti. I'm here as President of Darebin Appropriate Development Association, and good evening to you all. So I'll start now. Thank you to the team for their comprehensive efforts in producing the 3 documents before Council tonight on Preston Market. My reason for wanting to speak to you is to share my concern of the lack of appreciation of the aesthetic and technical aspects of the current market buildings in the documents before you, and how completely all of the positive attributes and the living cultural history are embedded within the fabric of the buildings. It is a mistake to think we can protect those tangible and intangible attributes in a redeveloped quarter and new buildings. You can attempt to recreate that, but it will be fake, much like building a Victorian terrace in 2019. While Objective 1 at dot point 6 makes reference to design characteristics of space frame, and the complete document lacks a comprehensive understanding of the uniqueness and importance of the building itself, suggesting reproduction space frame is frankly insulting. There is a problem that the recommendations make the assumption the market needs to be rebuilt when renovated might be a more appropriate outcome. The claim by the developer that the condition of the market is poor has not been tested by Council. There should not be plans to demolish it until that claim is independently tested. The key tenet of sustainability is to reuse, not rebuild. And just finally, on behalf of Barry Pearce and David Race and the original architects, I request an opportunity to provide a short briefing to Council on the design concepts and fabrication technology techniques that make the market building so unique. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Paletti. Mr. Erlinson, welcome.
Thank you. Chris Erlinson. I'm just here as a resident and also on behalf of Save Our Preston Market. This is just very brief, but first, congratulations on the production of the recent documents, those 3 that have been presented. That, on balance, better reflects community sentiment, we believe. We're generally prepared to support option 2, but we would like to raise some points for discussion that may lead to new amendments or minor review of some aspects of Council's Preston Market precinct update. Option 2 states that Council should endorse the objectives and key elements with any amendments and note background reports. At the outset, we feel it's important to highlight the bombshell on page 3, dot point 3, 5 and 6 that has not been raised previously in any forum and suddenly appears in Council's update regarding the apparent poor condition of the market buildings, and how Council has automatically infers that the best way forward is to rebuild the market in a different location, which would be best for everyone. We suggest this kind of assumption is a veiled threat made to unnecessarily advance the push for relocating the market buildings. We continue to strongly support retention of the existing market buildings on their original setting, since in our view there has been no convincing reason to change that view. In addition to independent experts, we think Council should approach the original architects of the Preston Market and their designers who appeared at the Heritage hearing to seek their professional advice on this matter. Also on page 61 of the Hello City report, in the key findings settings, moving the market quarter, it states, will not in itself support the market's identity.
Sorry, that's time. If you finish your sentence.
Okay. So we're thinking that you know, there is enough support in the existing documents that that we should still seriously consider not just retaining the market where it is.
Thank you, Mr. Ellison.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I have a, if there are no questions, I have an alternate motion I'd like to put.
Yes, Councillor Greco, go ahead.
I distributed this alternate motion late this afternoon. I'm sure councillors have got a copy of it, otherwise it'll come up on the screen.
So just ask if there's a seconder for that.
I'll give councillors the opportunity to have a read. The changes are highlighted in red.
I think we don't have all the changes that you've proposed on that. There's other pages, so it's a bit problematic because people can't second it without knowing what they'd be seconding. These were circulated at 4:30 this afternoon, councillors, in case.
I'm happy to second. I just want to clarify the location of the market in this updated amendment. I think it's on the first page.
Okay, so we have a seconder, Councillor Greco.
So we have a seconder, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Look, thank you, and Councillor Lawrence for seconding my motion. Look, first of all, I'd like to say from the outset that I'd like to thank the officers for drawing all the various consultation that has occurred and all the various documents that have informed this vision that is here before us for council to endorse. So I thank them for some mighty effort to try and draw in all that information. I think a lot of the points that have been made are quite comprehensive. They try to cover and capture the general sentiment of the community in relation to safeguarding some of the more important aspects of the market and ensuring that that particular development side, as much as we can as a council, to ensure that future development occurs in a conducive way and meets the community's expectations. Look, I won't go through all the points that have been raised by officers. Maybe other councillors may want to pay attention to them, but I'll just focus in on some of the points that I've raised, which are highlighted in red. The first point there is that the council expresses a desire to keep the market where it is. And why I basically say that is that because all the reports that I have read, particularly the latest report, which I think is a very balanced report, it's a report from Hello City, which says that moving the market or doing away with the market will risk the ensuring that we maintain the actual key qualities, particularly the intangible aspects of the market. So, and I think that the community consultation that we've had so far, some people say that the community consultation was divided about whether the market should be moved or not, but my reading of the community consultation, when you read in depth, is that the community would prefer to leave the market where it is, obviously with lots of improvements and a regeneration of the area. The other points that I've raised also in the alternate motion also go towards the making sure that we actually are a little bit tighter in the language that we use in regards to our vision. Because I found that some of the points were a bit loose by the wording that was there, particularly around parking. Whilst we mentioned that there should be no ground level parking, I think we should make a point that where possible that the parking should be underground. So I've stated that in the motion that I put forward. Also, I've also stated there about having mandatory height limits up to 12 stories. That's something that I think was omitted. And also the other point in the 10 seconds that I've got left is tiling the language around affordable housing, using the word social housing, and also entertaining the state government to launch into a pilot inclusionary zoning scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Greco,
will enable,
that's time.
and I'll finish on this point, that will enable low-income earners to have access to appropriate housing.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I actually did have an amendment, but anyway, for the purposes of getting this debated, I'll continue, but I would have thought D5 should have been provide a minimum of affordable...
Sorry, I'm not able to. Obviously, as the seconder, you can't put an amendment.
I can't second it, but I'll just flag that. And obviously, there's a lot of technical points we've had to go through since 4:30 of receiving this. Look, I think in the major change is to that's been sought by the developer for a number of years has been that the community has voted and the council, previous councils have voted continuously to keep the central footprint of the market at the centre. We've heard from people about the crossroads of the market and the importance of the atmosphere that's created where that crossroad is. So, and that's come through from those members of the community supporting saving the market. So obviously, any proposal from this council to demolish any of the market is a betrayal of that vision for 20 years. Well, I think it goes back a number of councils before I was on council, before 11 years ago, which is to preserve the centrality of the market. Also in the previous council position was that there was a 10-storey mandated height, and that is what commercial interests have been seeking to break for a number of years. So again, we're beginning to lose in this document, unless we accept some of these amendments, the initial community response to the market site and the more recent responses from Save Preston Market itself.
10 seconds.
And not only should we really try to keep the central part of the market, we could actually extend the food offer south on car parking and retain the existing market.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I was about to stand up, but I won't. So I think there's some good ideas in here, but I was speaking against it for a couple of reasons. So I think particularly the amendment where it talks about expressing a strong desire to leave the market as far as possible where it is. I'm speaking against that because in the report it talks about how if you were to keep the market where it was, that actually makes it quite hard for the traders to continue operating, whereas it's possible that if the market was in a different configuration, then that might make it easier to transition, where traders might be able to continue while work is happening. So I think that's really important. And we've had a lot of discussions about this. We've heard a lot about from our community about what they think. And I think this recommendation and the reports that we've got actually really show that there is a character of the market, and it doesn't, in my view, necessarily have to be exactly where the market is now. I think there's a possibility that the culture and feel of the market could be retained even if it does need to be rebuilt. So if I'm against the first potential amendment for that reason. And for me, that's enough to say no to this motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll also speak against this amended version and would welcome consideration of the substantive motion as listed in the report, because I think it actually goes a great deal towards achieving what I would like to think that this entire chamber shares, which is a vision for a significantly expanded Preston market, taking on board all of the character qualities that we've described. My concern with what's proposed here, and I'm just seeing it now, unfortunately I didn't see it at 4:30, so it's quite a bit to consider, but the very notion that the way to protect the market and to protect the market going forward by locking it into the existing location and footprint seems a complete anathema to the notion that you could have continuous trade. That actually makes it incredibly difficult. And I think we know enough, and councillors have been briefed enough about the market economics to know that there is an opportunity, as is recommended in this report, to actually see continuous trade as much as possible, not only of the existing market holders and of the existing market operation, but of course to see an expanded footprint, significantly so, as is outlined in the report. So on that basis, I can't support the amendments as listed, partly because they're coming
Sorry,
very
just
late.
say they're not amendments in this form. This is the motion, so you can't
Sorry, the
support the
amended
motion.
version, and I'm inclined to support the substantive because it actually articulates a way forward which is far more in keeping with what the community vision is. The other point which concerns me about Councillor Greco's amended version is actually that it doesn't seem to redress the issues that have been addressed by a lot of women in our community through the community survey in relation to where the market is, the current footprint, the current configuration, and issues around safety, particularly at night time. We want to see Preston Market be a thriving place for community. That's our whole community. We want people to be able to access it when it is operating. We want to enable traders, if they wish, to be trading into the
Councillor
evenings.
McCarthy, that's time.
That's the vision.
Thank you. Are there further speakers? No. Councillor Greco, you have a right of reply.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, thank you for the speakers for and against. Look, I believe that the speakers against have just focused in on one issue and basically given a superficial arguments in terms of not supporting this particular motion. This motion, basically, it keeps everything that the officers have put down, but what it does is that it adds a few further points in order to make the motion a little bit more robust and to ensure that the language is tighter than what it currently is. But going to the central point about the preference or expressing a willingness to keep the market where it is that the Hello City report makes reference to that, and particularly the Hello City report says that when you do away with the market, or if you were to demolish the market or rebuild the market, there's a high risk in maintaining or retaining all the issues associated with the identity and the current character of the market. It's assumed that if we were to rebuild the market in a different location, that you would take everything that the market has now in terms of its intangible value and its intangible character, that you can easily transpose those things into a new site. I've never seen that happen anywhere before, and I don't think that it could happen now. So what the Hello City report indicates also, one of the things that it says is that you have a graduation where you keep a preference for the existing site, and that you graduate towards further development of the market, and perhaps even extending the market towards a street front and things like that. So like that, you actually maintain some of the existing character and the unique identity that the market has. Otherwise, there's a danger of completely erasing it. So on that basis, look, I seek that the councillors will seriously consider what I put forward. It's in relation to a general vision. It's not locking us into anything. It's just a vision for the community and for the council to hold.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is lost.
I'd move an
Sorry, we'll just wait. So that motion has been lost. I'll now invite another motion.
I'd like to move an amended motion.
Okay, rather than amended, you just move a motion. So what would the motion be, Councillor Lawrence?
Well, the officer recommendation with the addition in relation to affordable housing, that the figure be 30%, not 15%.
Okay, so we'll get up the officer's recommendation, and then noting at point D5 under objective 4, provide affordable and then 30% in brackets social and diverse housing. No, just diverse housing. So we'll just make sure. So this is the motion you wish to move?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for this motion?
I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Sorry, it's confused between a formal meeting, but obviously this is a serious issue that's been going on for a while. I think it's really disappointing. The Preston Market community people use the term bombshell and threat, but really taking out the market from the heart of the market is ripping the heart out of the market. But I can see from the mood and the exchange of texts and the contents of those texts that are going around while Councillor Greco was speaking, that there isn't a mood to preserve the central market. But we could save this embarrassing decision in some ways if we fought for some housing for our community.
I'm sorry, I've got a point of order there.
Yes, Councillor
Sorry,
Lasserre.
I'll just go to the governance local law so I get this right. What page? Do we have a page number? For point of order.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. I think that the comments that Councillor Lawrence just made were offensive in regard to the conduct of councillors in this chamber.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserre. Councillor Lawrence, a councillor has found the comments that you made offensive. Do you care to withdraw them?
Which particular words?
Councillor Lasserre.
Around exchanging of text messages and saving us from an embarrassing decision.
Councillor Lawrence, your colleague has indicated that those comments were found to be offensive.
I'm happy to withdraw embarrassing decision.
And also not within in the code of conduct, I guess, to add to the point of order.
Okay, thank you. So we'll take that as withdrawn, and thank you for that.
Yes. So,
Councillor Lasserre.
again, there was a range of amendments submitted that's obviously not been seriously considered. And again, the body language, I would say that these points that were put forward earlier should have been debated piece by piece. So I'm putting one up now, which is the issue of the diversity of housing, which it doesn't go to, and I hope that people can consider that one item, given that we have obviously lost tonight, we're actually voting to demolish the Preston Market.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Greco.
Thank you. Look, again, I support the overall intention of the motion, in particular the changes that Councillor Lawrence is putting forward in regards to affordable housing. I think in regards to this particular point, there is something that I was trying to highlight in my initial motion that I put, is that what we're talking about is a huge development site into the future, and that we need to ensure that this huge development site incorporates a sufficient amount of social housing. My experience has been that when the original application for development was appealed at BCAT, that the wording that we originally used there in our incorporated plan was so weak that the developers were basically just tore us to shreds in relation to what affordable housing could mean, meant, or otherwise. So I think it's important that that we make a focus and an emphasis on affordable housing to ensure that in any future development on that site, and also in regards to the negotiations that take place, is that we ensure that affordable housing is an integral part of any future development there. So that's why I consider that to be really, really important. And I would think that given the debate that's happened here in the chamber around issues of affordable housing, social housing, etc., that given that we are endorsing a vision, which is like, if you like a log of claims for the council, in terms of going in and negotiating with the state government and with the developers, that we would go in there with an amber claim as wide as we can,
10 seconds.
so that we can secure at least some practical and feasible affordable housing.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there further speakers? Councillor Messina first.
Thank you. If I had a magic wand, I would love to have 50% in those brackets rather than 30, but I think we need to be realistic. And my understanding is that 3% of affordable housing has been granted over previous precedents. So asking for 30%, sure, why not? But asking for 50, why don't we ask for 50? But is it realistic? Unrealistic? The answer is no, in my opinion. Whilst I also do agree with some of Councillor Greco's motions previously, I'm going to foreshadow that I have a motion that I'd like to put up after this debate. But do I have a magic wand and ask for 50%? I wish I could, but 30% is really unrealistic.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor McCarthy.
Just a question, if I may, and it goes to a point that Councillor Messina made. I just want to get some clarity. If officers could advise what is the highest proportion of affordable housing as is proposed here that has been provided or agreed to by the Minister in relation to developments of this scope and scale.
Okay, so Ms Olivier, I'll hand that to you or one of your team members.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. So essentially, affordable housing is a complex topic when it comes to planning decisions. There's there's the legislated Affordable Housing Act, but it doesn't come down to inclusionary housing requirements. So the only way that you can get a percentage of affordable housing is through agreement. The percentage has to be attributed to the value of uplift in the development site. There's obviously a large site with a lot of potential, however, without adequate, knowledge in front of us in terms of the financial uplift, we're not able to say whether or not this is achievable. Certainly, from memory, I think probably the maximum that I know of would be more like 10%.
Thank you, Ms Mayor. Councillor McCarthy.
A further question that arises out of the officer response, and I thank the officer for her response. Just in relation to agreements about affordable housing as outlined, am I correct in understanding then from that answer that it is not actually just the Minister that needs to agree, but it is the actual applicant that needs to go into agreement in relation to that proportion? So it's not the direction of the Minister, but in fact the applicant that would need to agree in this instance.
Ms Mayor.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, yes, that's correct. And a Section 173 agreement is entered into by council and the developer as parties to the agreement, and it has to be by agreement, which is by nature voluntary.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
Can I ask a question also? Can we get some direction from the officers that whether the Minister has the power to require affordable housing to be part of the development, irrespective of a 173 agreement?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, the Minister is able, I guess, by his own discretion to incorporate such a requirement. However, through the affordable housing legislation and all the reforms that have recently taken place, he's made it clear that his preference is for voluntary agreements only. The current advice from DELP is that we have to come to an agreement with the developer before any requirement is put into the controls.
Thank you.
On that basis, Mayor Rennie, I'll speak against Councillor Lawrence's motion. And I do so with some regret because I have no disagreement with any of the arguments about the need for affordable housing, particularly social housing, and of course I would obviously like to see public housing included in this site. That's not what we have before us, and the response by our officer just now made it very clear to me that the decision we have before us is actually about not just negotiating with the Minister, not just negotiating with the VPA, not just advocating and putting our best case forward on behalf of residents, community, traders, you name it, but in fact to actually win the argument with the developer, the applicant in this case, to hear that the highest amount of affordable housing that has been achieved under the current planning minister, and I would say under previous planning ministers going back at least a decade, is the highest component that's been achieved is up to potentially 10%, but more likely there are 1 or 2%, maybe even 3%, does not give me any confidence that the 30% figure that Councillor Lawrence has put forward, although noble in its principle, and whilst I agree with the intent, is likely to see us actually see that completely off the table rather than having something that is achievable. I'm not as confident as I would like to be because of the mutual agreement component, as per the reforms to the Affordable Housing Act that have just been outlined, that we will achieve this. But I hope we will, and I believe we should put our best case forward. The 15% figure actually is, in the context of what is currently agreed to by both the Minister and planning applicants, considered a stretch target. I'll be really frank. But we need to put the best case forward and actually have a serious case. It is not the case at the moment that we have the legislative powers to appeal to under the Minister to enforce this. It is actually at this point in time under the Act by mutual agreement, and we need to be taken seriously, councillors.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'd also like to speak against this motion. I very much support the principles of affordable housing, diverse housing, social housing and public housing, but we have a failure of state government here to not enforce inclusionary zoning. And so we're not in a position to mandate it because we don't have inclusionary zoning. So while I'd love to put something like this forward, I agree with Councillor McCarthy that we have to be realistic about what we can do when it is a voluntary agreement that we're entering into with the developers, even with the Minister's discretion. So for me, I think 15% is a goal that is worth trying for. I think that 30% without anything like inclusionary zoning is unrealistic at this stage. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Any further speakers? Yes, Councillor Lawrence.
Mayor, I just want to have a question through you to the officers. So do we have agreement from the Minister and the developer for 15% of affordable housing?
Thank you for that question. I'll pass that to Ms Mayer or Ms Olivier.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. So the report you've got in front of you recommends a range of objectives and key elements. If Council endorsed those, we would seek, we'd speak to the state government and the developer and seek their support for Council's preferences. That would be the next step in the process.
So is that a no, we don't actually
No, there's
currently
no
have
current agreement.
Thank you. Is that clear, Councillor
I have a
Lawrence?
question, if I may.
Yes, Councillor Greco.
Yeah, I just have a question, just in relation to item, let's have a look here. It's item B, no, item C, C1, which talks about the meaningful involvement of migrant communities in precinct design and creation of new open spaces. And again, I just want to get an understanding of how do we expect to achieve that? Is that a realistic objective?
Ms Meyer, over to you.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Essentially, this aspect would be an ask, not a requirement. There, you could put in, for example, a built form control that identifies the need to reflect the diverse views of the migrant communities, but essentially the exact outcomes should be done through deep and meaningful consultation with those communities to really understand what they want. So that would happen outside the planning process.
I just had a supplementary question. I just heard the words that some things are an ask and some things are a requirement. Can we know, out of all these vision statements, which are the asks and which are the requirements?
So, through you, Mayor Rennie, These are, I guess, the report sets out a range of things that we would seek should council endorse them, and we'd seek them from the developer and from through the state government, and we'd ask them to be incorporated into planning controls, design, management plans, and operational arrangements. Essentially, the strongest way to achieve these will be a combination of both. There is no doubt about that.
Thank you, Ms Levy. Ms Wilkinson has something to add.
Can I, in terms of the previous question, which is, goes to the point about how it might, and whether or not there's any value, how it might be meaningful to achieve engagement and creation of open spaces. I thought it worth reminding Council that one of the key elements of Council's open space strategy that is on exhibition actually indicates that that is something that Council will seek to do in the design of its own open space going forward. So it's leading work. It's work that there's not a lot of experience of in Australia, but it's certainly something that is relevant to our community. In terms of how that is achieved, it's achieved through objectives and planning controls, but it's also achieved in the detail at the point with which planning applications become a reality. So the use of that provision will seek to influence the Minister's thinking, the VPA's thinking, the developer's thinking, but also Council's own thinking into the long term. With regard to asks versus, I forgot the phrase, versus requirements, the reality of this report is the intent is that all of these would be asks. So they would frame the basis of officers going to the state government and saying to the state government, this is the intent of our outcomes. Now, some are clearly very specific, so where you can see things like 12 metres wide, I guess that's what that might be what the staff are referring to in terms of a requirement. But where we talk about an outcome base without a specific provision, then that's probably what the staff mean by an ask. So the intent is clear. I don't actually think it's that helpful to differentiate. The intent is for this to add to the work that Council's already determined. So there are many resolutions that precede this decision. They are to be seen in totality and will be presented to the state in totality. And in fact, as further evidence is presented, the intent or completed, the intent is to come back to Council to revisit again and again and again as this process reveals itself. So I hope that clarifies.
Thank you. I'll now seek any further speakers. Councillor Lasserf.
I'd like to propose an amendment, if I could.
Sure.
I'd like to amend the 30% to 20%.
Okay.
I'm the mover, am I the second?
You're the mover?
As a mover, I wouldn't accept that.
You wouldn't accept it,
And
okay.
I can explain
Thank you.
why
No,
as we
you don't
get
need
to
to
a
accept it. Thank you. The CEO has provided advice that it is contrary to the motion, opposite to the motion. On the grounds that it's
What basis does it contravene the motion?
opposite to the intent.
So through you, Mayor Rennie, my advice would be that the governance local law is very clear that it says amendments to motions mustn't be opposite to the motion. My view is that the 30% number is a very deliberate figure. Reducing it to 20% is in fact a reduction by a third, which is not insubstantial. It is a bit of a judgment call, but that would be my advice. Ultimately, it's the Chair's decision.
Just a point of order, if I may, through you, Mayor. What we have before us is not just that single amendment. What we have before us is the whole motion. In that whole motion, one of the items in that whole motion refers to
You've entered
the 20 or
debate,
30%.
Councillor Greco.
So that's my point of order, that I would think that that the advice that we have received, I'm not really sure of.
Okay, thank you. As the chair, I have the final ruling. I'm taking this motion as a whole, with however many parts that it has. I don't believe that a change from 30% to 20% is in opposition to the whole motion, because I think it is one small part of a much larger motion. However, I have heard that this amendment has not been accepted by the mover. So on that basis, it won't be automatically accepted, but would need to obtain a seconder. Councillor McCarthy, you're seconding it. So we will debate this, and in that way people will have an opportunity to say what they think. So, Councillor Lasserf, thank you.
Okay, I'll speak directly to the amendment. And while I would love to see at least 30% affordable housing on the Preston Market site, I think that it would not be achieved. I think that the 30% is an ambit claim, and I think it is, I guess, a bit too extreme in terms of a starting position for us to be negotiating with the state and with the developer. And I think that decreasing the ask to 20% puts us in a much better negotiating position. And I guess while I would like to see community housing and public housing on the site as a priority, it does say affordable housing, and affordable housing is a very broad term, and so there are other forms of housing that could be on the site as well, like student accommodation and access for people to purchase or rent housing at a lower cost. So while I support the 30% that Councillor Lawrence put forward, I think that we need to be realistic, and we need to put forward a cohesive, strong argument when we go into with all of these asks, because we have many things in this motion that we're asking for, and it would be great if we could tick off this one to some extent. I've heard from the officers 10% is the highest that we've achieved, so if we got double that, that would be amazing. I don't think that we would get there though, let alone triple that.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Councillor McCarthy.
Councillor Lasserf has outlined her rationale, and I appreciate the logic of it. The reality is that affordable housing, as Councillor Lasserf has pointed out, is a very broad term. It encompasses quite a lot that could be negotiated with the applicant. I think it's more realistic than what we had before, which I would say was a considerable ambit claim. I think this is still a bit of a stretch based on what we know. However, the reality is that this is about approaching both the government and ideally also the applicant to see the opportunity here to deliver an extraordinary social outcome at this site. And at the end of the day, any development of housing at the Preston Market site, which has been on the books in this chamber because of the decisions of previous councils going back over a decade, 15 years or so, and potentially even longer in terms of the minds of some people, to get a social outcome of this nature would be extraordinary. To get an outcome that ensures that we have housing for people who would otherwise be cut out of the housing market in this area would be a wonderful thing. And it's actually the mix and composition of that 20% or the 15% if that was to be achieved, which I think is absolutely critical. And obviously we would want to see this site be a place where people from a whole range of backgrounds can live in harmony, live connected, and be, of course, the #1 customers of Preston Market in terms of this is where they eat and drink and purchase their food and connect with the community. So I support Councillor Lasserf's attempt to find a compromise position, and I really hope we can get on and advocate really strongly for the best outcome for Preston Market.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Messina, you wish to speak to the amendment?
I'd like to ask a question, please. When Councillor Lawrence put forth his amendment to 30%, I actually said that I wanted to move a motion based on that debate, yet we've accepted Councillor Lasserf's amendment.
No, we haven't.
So okay.
We haven't accepted anything. We're debating Councillor Lasserf's amendment.
And my question is, are we also debating the pages previously to this, please?
Sorry?
The amendment, is the amendment only the 30%?
The amendment is that the motion in front of us was the motion recommended by officers but with 30% instead of 15%.
Okay, I just wanted some clarity.
The only amendment that is currently being discussed or debated is Councillor Surf's amendment to the motion that Councillor Lawrence put up, which is that the 30% would become 20%.
Okay, thank you for that
So
clarity.
if you foreshadow a motion, we deal with that when we no longer have a motion in front of us. We have a motion in front of us and we're currently dealing with the amendment. So I've had Councillor LaSurf and Councillor McCarthy speak to the amendment. Are there further speakers to the amendment? Councillor Lawrence.
Mayor Rennie, yes, I'd just speak against the amendment and just because fundamentally we've seen this in the UK, urban renewal projects go on, massive ones, and that's what we're dealing with, a massive renewal of the centre of Preston and the centre of Darebin. To ask for 30% affordable and plus some diverse housing is a minimal ask. And why I would say so is in the UK, what we saw with their urban renewal was 10% to 30% inclusionary zoning for social and low income housing. Affordable housing is simply housing that will be offered at 20% less than the market value. Now, at the present, I think we've just read it's only 3% of rentals in Darebin are actually affordable. We're locking out people massively. So I think a 30% affordable is minimal. My rationale, I suppose I'll speak in the rebuttal, but my rationale was we've waved the white flag on the site, we've waved the white flag on the heights, don't wave the white flag on our community living there.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers in relation to the amendment? Councillor Greco.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Look, I'm going to speak in favour of the, against the amendment and just that we stay with the 30%. As part of this debate, it's been mentioned that it's perhaps an unrealistic ask to, to go for 30% and that it will not be given to us. No one would entertain that. But when I read these directions or this vision statement, and I wonder whether it's unrealistic to ask that the developer would ensure security and affordability for traders by prioritising existing tenants. I haven't seen that happen, or by the developer setting the same price in rent adjusted for inflation. I haven't seen that happen, or offering a variety of flexible lease options. I haven't seen that happen. I've actually seen the opposite happen. So in terms of the asks that we're putting forward in the overall motion, some of them you could say are quite ambit claims, and in a way, it's perhaps that they are. It's good that they are there. So I don't see any reason why we should shy away from making an ask of 30%. We know that we won't achieve 30%, but we know that in this project, one thing is going to be for sure, and it's already been flagged, is that there will be massive trade-offs in relation to what the ultimate outcome of this is. And as Councillor Lawrence has already pointed out, is that we've already given in on many grounds. We've already said, even contrary
Point of order, please. Just to point out that no decision has yet been made, so that's not a correct statement.
So what was that? I didn't understand.
The claim was
I'll need to get you to refer to the governance local law in relation to your point of order and refer me specifically to the clause.
Well, I guess my query would be if there's anything under the local law that councillors should not make statements that are untrue. For example, that a decision has been made on the matter before us when we're clearly still debating it. So that would be 47A as a query.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Councillor Amir.
Could I just understand what I've said that is untrue?
The claim was that we've already given in and no decision has been made tonight. We've been debating this motion.
Thank you. So,
Councillor It's an assertion that I'm making. It's a belief that I have, and I'm entitled to hold that belief.
Okay.
That I believe that what's
stop.
been...
No, stop, Councillor Amir. Councillor Amir. Okay, it's over to me as the chair. Okay. Councillor Greco. Councillor Amir has raised a point of order. that in her opinion, a statement you made, okay, is contrary to the governance local law. I'm asking you if you'd like to withdraw that statement so that we can get on with the meeting, and the statement question related to suggesting that we'd already given in.
I'm afraid that I'm not going to withdraw that statement because I have not made a statement that's contrary to the local law.
Okay. I think we've heard from a councillor that that statement has been found to be inaccurate. Councillor Muir, I'll ask whether you wish us to debate this. Could you
Point
speak
of
up?
order. Mayor, ready?
Sorry, Councillor Lawrence, we're resolving this first.
But you've just made a false statement. And we have minutes.
Councillor Lawrence, I'm dealing with this. I'm dealing with this matter, okay? And I'd ask you to be quiet. You're not involved in this matter, okay? So please allow me to deal with this matter. Okay. Okay. Councillor O'Meara, I'm not certain that that can actually be classed as a point of order, and so on that basis I'd suggest that we move on. And I would remind everyone that it's not helpful if the debate isn't conducted in a respectful manner, so we will continue with the debate and try and contain ourselves to comments that are respectful and unlikely to upset or offend anyone in the chamber or indeed in the audience. Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Greco, back to you. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'm glad that I'm able to continue and express my views. Look, as I said, I believe that we've already given in on a lot of these issues, particularly in relation to the where the market is placed, and the fact that what's implied here is that the market
10 seconds.
will be moved. And I believe that that's contrary to what the community sentiment and community feeling and the community feedback has been. And as a result of that...
That's time. Thank you, Councillor Greco. So we're now debating the amendment, and we've heard from Councillor Lasserve, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers on this amendment?
Just a question.
Yes, Councillor Lawrence.
For clarity, so when we're actually debating 20%, not 30, it's just confusing.
Yes, so that is...
It's just
sorry.
It should read 20% KL.
KL. Thank you for that clarification, Councillor Lawrence. I think that's helpful. And we'll put Kim Lasserve. Thank you. So we've had 4 speakers on the amendment. Does anyone else wish to speak to the amendment? There being no further speakers on that amendment, I'll put that to the vote.
Sorry, can I just have a right of reply in the amendment?
No, you don't get a right of reply on an amendment. So we'll now vote on... Okay, so we'll put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour? And against?
I misvoted. I thought it was the 30%.
Okay, so just because it would be
Just momentarily distracted.
So you're voting. Okay, so let's do that again so that everyone has an opportunity to vote the way they wish. All those in favour? And against? That amendment is carried. So this is now.
Could I have my vote in the negative recorded?
You could have your vote in the negative recorded. Councillor Greco, would you like your vote recorded as well? Yes, so we'll record those votes. Yes, so we're now back to the motion. We've heard from Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Greco, Councillor Messina, Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Newton.
No, sorry, in relation to the
substantive motion in front of us. Are there any further speakers?
So we're speaking in relation to now the...
We are now speaking in relation to the substantive motion which is on the screen in front of us.
Okay, I have an amendment to put forward.
I'm sorry, Councillor Greco, you are the seconder of the motion and therefore you cannot put an amendment up. So are there any further speakers?
Just a question, if I may, Mayor, just in relation to who can now speak. If councillors spoke to the motion...
So the only people who haven't spoken to the motion are Councillors Amir and Councillor Lasserve.
Sorry, can I just finish my question,
Yep.
if I may? If a councillor has spoken against the motion as it read previously on the basis of an item that has now changed, they no longer can speak.
That councillor can no longer speak. You can vote as you choose, but no, so there's only 2 councillors.
Just to clarity, is there a rebuttal on the substantive motion?
No, there is no right of reply because the substantive motion has been amended. So are there any further...
I would withdraw my moving of the substantive motion.
I'll just seek advice on that, councillor.
You better move your amendment or you'll miss.
I'm going to move it.
This will pass, so you won't get any speaking rights now.
I can move an amendment.
This will pass, then you won't get any.
You move an amendment. Yeah.
Just please stop talking.
Sorry, but no, if this votes through, then it's over.
No, that's not true.
We're now on the substantive motion.
Sorry, councillors, while we're sorting this out, I would ask if you could just be silent. That would be helpful.
That's become the substantive. Except I've withdrawn my moving, so now they're confused.
I'm confused.
Okay, so Councillor Lawrence, you wish to withdraw the fact that you are the mover of the motion. You may do that. I will now ask if somebody else would like to move that motion. Councillor McCarthy, so moved. So we still have the motion in front of us, and I'll ask if there are any further speakers. Sorry, one hand at a time. Okay.
I'd like some clarity because I'm so confused. I'm sorry, I don't know if anybody else is on this journey, but could I see the full motion with...
Okay, the full motion is exactly as it is in your papers,
Plus
but it has that 0.20% instead of 15%.
And if I were to make an amendment to this particular motion, am I able to do that?
Yes, you are not the mover or the seconder, so you are able to make an amendment.
Right, okay.
But can I just, before I go on, are there any other questions that I should answer before this? We have a motion on the table in front of us which has now been moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded by Councillor Greco. Thank you, Councillor Greco.
I'm happy to be the seconder.
Okay, so it's now been moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded by Councillor Lasserf.
I have a question that now that I've withdrawn as a seconder of the motion, and it implies that I also withdraw my speaking to the motion, and therefore I request to speak on this motion.
No, you have spoken to the motion. So if you have spoken to the motion, that remains the same. You have spoken to the motion.
But just a point of clarification, but if I've withdrawn from the motion,
it doesn't matter. You've still
the motion.
spoken to this motion. You don't get to speak to this motion again. You may vote however you wish, but you may not speak again if you have spoken to the motion. So are there any further speakers? Oh, so, yeah, Councillor Messina, that's correct. You did actually suggest you had an amendment.
Thank you. Can I put up Councillor Greco's original notice of motion or change recommendation that we debated previously?
No, we've already dealt with that.
Well, there are items in that I'd like to put forth.
So you'd have to
Move them individually.
you have to move the amendments that you wish to move.
Okay.
And you may move 2 amendments.
2 amendments.
Yes.
Two
You can do them together, but okay.
One that council. Oh, sorry, apologies. That council up to page. This is going to be difficult to go through, but item number 13. Strong public space functionality with generous public seating and market streets that remain open to the public 24/7 are protected via easements.
What I'm going to suggest is that if these are acceptable to the mover and seconder, we can do them separately. If they're not, I'm going to treat them as one amendment. Is that satisfactory?
Yep.
Yep.
I don't know which one you're talking about, sorry. What letter?
Councillor Greco's original amendment.
Is it under what objective?
2A12, I think.
2A12, yes.
2A.
Strong public space functionality with generous public seating and.
So that's 2A12. We'll get that up on the screen. We'll ask if it's acceptable to the mover and the seconder. Yep.
Can I just read this? Sorry.
So that's acceptable to the seconder. Is it acceptable?
I can't, I need to see it,
Okay.
sorry. I can't make a decision until I see it.
The last line.
So don't look at all the red, just look at that final one, strong public space functionality.
Sorry, can I just ask, just so I can just understand the
The rest of the red is not.
the rest of the red? I'm colourblind, so I can't. So I'm
It's just the last line. Last line.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Thank you.
So there's addition of...
Strong public space functionality with generous public seating.
Yes.
That's the inclusion.
Yes.
I would just, before I answer, can I just ask one question in relation to that?
Yes.
Those terms are planning terms. I'm just wanting to make sure that we're using language, if I do consider supporting this and including it as the mover, that those terms are robust terms from a planning perspective.
Ms Hayes or Ms Mayer, can I get a response to Councillor McCarthy's question?
Just to say that the generous public seating would not be protected by the easements. It's only the streets that could be protected by the easements. So as long as that's clear, then we're happy to. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm lost.
Can we get some further clarification in relation to that answer? Sorry.
Okay. Ms Hayes, if you could explain what you meant by that.
Sorry, yes, through you, Mayor Rennie. Just that the way that that's worded at the moment, and I think they've just added a comma which clarifies to say that the market streets would be covered by the easements, but public seating would not be covered by easements. I think that comma does that.
Cured with a comma. Cured with a comma. Okay. So is that accepted to the mover?
Staunch opponent of the Oxford comma. I'm going to support it on this occasion.
Okay. So Councillor Messina, that's been accepted by the mover and the seconder. So if you could move to your next amendment.
Yes, the next amendment is item number 25. Yes, so 2A5 has the same sunlit, open and airy feel and characteristics of a genuine market and not a shopping centre or mall.
Once again, I would seek officer advice in relation to the specific words, because I believe these words have not actually been passed through officers previously, given how late they arrived this afternoon.
Okay, Ms Wilkinson.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, it's a bit line ball because, you know, what a genuine market, the definition of a genuine market is a bit, shopping centre or mall is very clear. A genuine market is actually the subject, this is the whole crux of this debate.
Sorry, Councillor Greco.
But I think the intent, you know, if it's offered as intent, then it's acceptable.
Councillor McCarthy, is the movie, do you accept that?
So just to be clear, the additional words are after feel and characteristics of a genuine market and not a shopping centre or mall. So if officers can work with that, I'm happy to accept that.
Okay, accepted by the mover. Is that accepted by the seconder? Yep. Yes.
I have another amendment. Oh, I beg your pardon. It is in relation to item number 19, stating no number 20. No car parking on the ground level and underground car parking wherever possible. I'm assuming that is implied that there is...
Sorry, you don't need to assume anything. We're just, you're putting up those words. So that's item C10.
Sorry, I said 20, C20.
So it's 2C10. And is that acceptable to the mover?
Sorry, can I just hear the words again? Apologies.
So the current words are no car parking on the ground level, and Councillor Messina wishes to add and underground car parking wherever possible.
So once again, I'll ask the question just for some officer comment in relation to the specific words proposed.
Yes, Ms Hayes.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, yes, we would support that.
Thank you.
On that basis, I'm happy to include it.
And Councillor Surf. Okay.
Although wherever should be one word.
Yep, so we'll correct the spelling, we won't worry about that. Thank you, Councillor Messina.
Now, I have a question before I put forth my next next amendment.
Yes.
And are we able to imply provisions for rental adjustments, or is that something that goes beyond the scope of this particular recommendation? In particular, rental adjustments during the construction requirements.
Okay, I'll seek advice on that.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I think as it's worded, not around compensation, but just providing for rental adjustments during periods of construction, then that would fall within what is normal within a retail environment. So we think it would be reasonable to ask for that.
Okay, thank you. Is that accepted to the mover?
I'm actually not clear on the implications of this. Can we?
So it's just a yes or a no?
No, but based on the officer advice. So I'd like. I actually don't understand what it means.
Okay.
I need further advice about what it actually would mean, and I can't actually see it either. So is it?
Okay, I'll seek advice from Ms Hayes in relation to how that would be interpreted if that was added.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. So we would interpret that as the developer recognising the impacts on traders of any periods where they were not able to trade, and recognising that within their leasing arrangements. So, for example, if they were closed for a period of time and were unable to trade, that their leasing arrangements could be adjusted to recognise that.
And just to be clear, because I'm conscious of unintended consequences, is this something which, in the wording as it currently stands, makes sense and is something that planning officers could, or council officers could advocate for?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, yes, we could. So outside of the planning controls, it would be a non-planning matter that we would seek to negotiate separately. But yes, this form of words would allow us to do that.
Okay, on that basis, is that acceptable to the mover and the seconder?
So just to be clear...
you can just say no if it's not acceptable.
I'm willing to accept it, but just to be clear, the wording as it currently stands is clear to officers, so on that basis...
Yeah, they've given that feedback. Would it be acceptable? Okay, that's also acceptable to the seconder. Councillor Messina?
That is it. I just wanted to clarify that we also have 20% as the figure in item number...
Yes, we
10.
do.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, councillors. Yes, Councillor Lawrence?
An amendment?
What's the amendment?
Sorry, can I just check in terms of the local laws? Councillor Lawrence moved the motion, and yes, he withdrew it, but does that give him access to now amend the motion? Yeah, well...
No, well, the advice, I'll just double check that advice, but I believe that he may not be able to...
No, that was speaking rights. I'm taking up my second chance to amend. My instructions are simple.
I have taken governance advice on this matter, and the advice I've received is that no, just because you withdrew, you do not have the right to now place amendments. So on that basis, I'm sorry, Councillor Lawrence, you're not able to put an amendment.
A clarification.
I'm quite keen to keep going with this debate. We've been going for well over an hour.
I have a right to a second amendment. It's regardless of whether you move or second or whatever. There's two amendments.
No, the mover of a motion does not have the right to place an amendment to the motion. Whilst I understand that you withdrew being the mover, you actually, for the purposes of being able to put amendments, are still considered to have done that and therefore forfeited your right to make an amendment. So that is my ruling. I accept that it's not popular, but that's where we're at.
Clarity on that ruling are you stating I don't have the right to propose an amendment or to move an amendment?
You don't have the right to propose an amendment. Councillor Lasserf. Or move
Point
on.
of order, I'd like to move a dissent in the chair.
Thank you.
While we're looking at that, could I ask a similar question?
No, sorry, you can't. Not while we're
I've got a
dealing with this.
question.
We deal with one thing at a time. He does. Come over. I need to know whether there is a seconder for that motion of dissent. Thank you, Councillor Greco. There being a motion of dissent in my ruling, I'll vacate the chair and invite Councillor Newton to come up.
Okay, sorry for the delay there. So, Councillor Lawrence, you have 3 minutes to state the reasons for dissent.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Newton. Look, I heard this ruling regarding the inability of a previous mover, of a discontinued mover, of a motion to propose an amendment. Well, a ruling was to move an amendment, and I was seeking to actually propose an amendment because I think the assumption was that that amendment would be refused. But if I proposed it, it may have actually been agreeable to the councillors here because no one has heard it. Now, this goes to heart not just to our local government meeting laws, but actually to good governance itself. Because we're about to make a vote here that fundamentally reverses a council position that sat here for 15 years, and that position is our bargaining point, which is we had a structure plan that fixed the market in its current location that no developer could bypass. They tried, they couldn't. We had a height limit on the market site that was a bargaining point that, again, because it was incorporated in a structure plan, could not be touched.
Councillor Lawrence, could you please speak to the ruling about dissent?
Yes.
Thanks.
So, I have dissent in the motion that we cannot even propose amendments as over-technical and poor governance, because in fact you don't know what I was going to propose. And I was no longer the mover of an amendment. In fact, the Mayor had taken a contrary view to officer advice that the amendment that was pushed on top of my moved and amended substantive motion, the officers gave advice that was contrary. So then I'm in a position where I'm confronted with a contrary motion, and then I'm denied even to suggest or propose an amendment that could have reached a compromise situation where we have a unified position on this issue. And again, you know, it's very serious that we're waving the red flag on social and public housing in this motion. We're waving the red flag on heights. Mandatory height is a very powerful tool. We've given that up. The central location of the market, we've heard from the community, is fundamental. So, again, I think good governance would have required that we at least hear what the proposed amendments might have been.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Mayor Rennie, you have 3 minutes for a right of reply. Thanks. So, just to clarify, the procedure is that the mover states the reasons for dissent and then the chairperson has the right of reply. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. I acknowledge this was not a situation I've encountered before, where we had people moving and seeking a motion, then later determining that they wished to withdraw that. Because of that, I sought advice. It was an unfamiliar situation to me, and I followed the advice that I sought from our governance officer. I don't believe there's a person more qualified in this room to provide that advice, and on that basis, I accepted the advice and made my ruling. I think the ruling was fair and reasonable, and when I actually think about why such a position might be the case, it is that what we don't want is a scenario where every time the mover or a seconder of a motion decides that they actually want to make a little change and they can't do so because they've moved or seconded. We don't want to see a scenario generally where those people might then say, I don't want to move or second. I think if you feel that you wish to move or second a motion, then it is that you are happy with the motion. I acknowledge what Councillor Lawrence said, that with the change he was no longer happy, but in fact the rest of the motion, and presumably that part of the motion he would now seek to change, is actually the motion he moved. So on that basis I stand by my ruling, but most particularly because it was made on the advice from the governance officer.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So the next step is that we're going to vote, and this is on that the Mayor's ruling be dissented from. So this is Councillor Lawrence's dissent. So what it means is that, do you agree with Councillor Lawrence? Yep. So all those in favour of the motion of dissent and against, that motion is lost. So Mayor Rennie, you can resume the chair. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Let's get on with this. So are there further speakers on the motion? Councillor Amir.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. So I feel a bit upset that there's been quite a lot of negativity in this planning meeting, because what we have here is something that we really all should be really, really proud of. This is the product of almost 2 years of work, if we count everything that came before us. As has been mentioned by other councillors, a decade of work or more, working with multiple organisations, thousands of residents, the traders, people who visit the market. And what is in here, the reports and then the recommendations that come from it, is not the opinion of councillors or the opinion of staff. It's the sum total of the thousands of views of those people, the residents, the traders, the shoppers. And we've been listening to that feedback over time. And one thing that really strikes me is that looking at all this, there is strong consensus on a lot of things. So everyone agrees that we want to have a vibrant fresh food market that is different from supermarkets and shopping centres. Everyone agrees on the importance of diversity, and there's lots of different forms of diversity. Cultural diversity, having affordable food so we can have socioeconomic diversity, the diversity of stalls and what they sell and the size, the diversity of food. People often mention being able to buy things they can't buy other places. Everyone agrees that there are some challenges, particularly around transport, whether you're someone who's driving and can't get a car park, a cyclist who nearly gets hit in the car park, or a pedestrian who finds it scary to walk from the station. So I'm really proud that we have got to a point where, rather than talking in short slogans, and I was one of those people who said save Preston Market, which doesn't mean much, but what we have here is something that is tangible, something that we can put this forward and say this is what the community wants. There are things here that the recommendation is silent on. I personally, including the location of the market, I personally think that's a strength because it provides the opportunity to get the best possible outcome for the market.
That's time. Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? No. Councillor Messina, I have you down as having spoken. You didn't. But in speaking against it, she spoke to it, and therefore she has spoken. You amended it.
No, she spoke against the motion.
Put forward amendments.
Sorry, I'm not. No. I agree. Councillor Messina spoke after Councillor Lawrence had spoken and Councillor Greco spoke. Councillor Messina then spoke. And at that point, Councillor Messina, I believe, was opposed. It was amended.
Yeah, but
She does not get to speak again. Councillor Messina has spoken. So everybody, other than Councillor Surf, has spoken. That is my ruling. There are no further speakers. It has been amended. Therefore, it goes straight to the vote.
Just a point of clarification, if I may.
Yes, Councillor Greco.
I take your point that Councillor Messina did put forward amendments, and those amendments were agreed to by the mover and the seconder. But I think you failed to ask Councillor Messina whether she wanted to speak in favour of the motion and her amendments.
No, I'm not going to grant Councillor Messina that right. She put together amendments. They were accepted. Therefore, you don't get to speak to your amendments if they have been accepted, and she has spoken to the motion. Councillor Messina, as everyone here is, of course, welcome to vote in any way she wishes on the motion in front of her. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Marini. Could I also get a point of clarification? I know we've been on this for over an hour, so could we just reconfirm the changes, if that's all right?
Okay, can we just have a look at each screen so that we are absolutely clear? So we now have that screen. There is one change from the officer recommendation, which you can see in yellow. Next screen. There's one change. Next screen. And next one. Nothing. Okay, so I hope that's clear to everyone. Okay, I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. We'll note Councillor Lawrence's opposition to that motion. That brings us to the end of item 5 in the agenda, so we'll now move to item 6. Just wait. It would appear that this appendix was not online. Can I check whether...
It was in the Dropbox.
It was in the Dropbox. Okay, thank you.
But it wasn't, it should be added so the public can see it.
Okay. Look, I think we will feel that we can actually move it anyway. So I'll seek a mover in relation to item 6.1. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Lawrence.
Will that agenda be available, or is it available on the website? That information publicly, I mean,
Yes, thank you. We'll get clarification of that.
of VCAT hearings.
Yep.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, yes, it can be, certainly. The other alternative available to council is to just defer consideration of this report until the next planning committee.
I've moved that we defer it to the next meeting.
That it is publicly displayed.
It's a report of activity that's already occurred, so noting it is something that can happen at the next meeting. It's unfortunate that we missed it, and I apologise.
Yeah, I've moved that we defer this to the next meeting.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Newton. So we're moving to defer item 6.1. All those in favour? That is deferred. That brings us to 7, urgent business. There is none. Consideration of reports considered confidential. There are none. Therefore, that brings us to close of the meeting. Thank you, councillors. It's been a long evening. Enjoy the rest of it.
Thank you. Thank you, officers.